And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit and turn our heads to what has been a primary focus since the very beginning of our work at STEM Connector. And that is how industry can support equitable access to high quality STEM education. We're going to turn to some of our industry partners to bring this home. And we're going to look at how some of these partners are both working with students in their communities, how they're partnering with nonprofits to advance equity in STEM. And we're going to start with their perspectives and some questions, but we do encourage you to ask some questions to keep the dialogue moving. We do have some time built in at the end for questions from the audience. So I'm going to introduce you to each one of them. Then each speaker is going to provide a short overview of their work. And let me get the slide up with their pictures. So hang on one moment. And here they are. Great. So this is our panel today. We're going to hear from this great group, and each of them is going to give a brief sort of overview of where they sit in their organization, what their focus is on equity in STEM and STEM in general. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce them, and then they'll go through in the same order and introduce themselves. And then I'm going to come back with a specific question for each one of them, and then we should have some time at the end to take some of your questions. So our first speaker, Jackie Berry, comes to us from the Twin Cities, where she is education manager for 3M Gives. 3M Gives is the philanthropic arm of 3M. And obviously 3M is one of the most iconic innovation brands that we have to thank for sandpaper and Post-it notes, just to name a couple iconic inventions. And they're highly dependent on STEM talent across the segments of their business, but they're also extremely committed to supporting equity in the communities where they operate. Our next speaker is Randy Bumps, who is the Global Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at Raytheon Technologies, or RTX, which is a newly formed company formed following the merger of United Technologies Corporation and Raytheon. STEM education is clearly an important major workforce need for them and his team's effort. And Randy is based in Connecticut, where he is joining us from today. Tamika Lang is part of Boeing Corporation's global engagement team, where she focuses on community partnerships in the Southwest region. Many of her partnerships focus on advancing equity in STEM education. And Tamika is based in Orange County, California, from where she joins us today. And finally, last but certainly not least, is a good friend and leader in this space from the nonprofit side, Phyllis Martin, who is Chief Executive Officer at the Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative. This organization aims to improve educational outcomes for all students in the Charleston, South Carolina region. As you may recall, Cradle to Career approaches were featured in last year's K12 STEM Innovation Lab and helped drive our white paper on place-based approaches to regional STEM workforce development. So I'm going to turn it to you, Jackie, to kick this off and share some perspectives from where you sit at 3M. Make sure you're muted, unmuted.
I apologize. I think I've done it every time. Every time I say I'm going to remember to unmute myself. Thanks, Chad, and thanks to STEM Connect and the team for pulling together such, I think, a timely lab. I mean, I know it's an important issue for 3M, and I just want to thank TGR Foundation for hosting us. I was looking forward to Anaheim, but you know, I'll be okay here in my little office in Minnesota. Just would love to spend a few minutes chatting with you about 3M's focus on STEM equity. It's not new for us. I mean, we decided to focus on equity in STEM probably a couple of years ago when we did a strategic refresh and really looked at the work that we wanted to do in STEM and how we could make a difference. And as you probably know, Ted talked about some of our products. We are a science-based company, so STEM and science are incredibly important to us. And we hire, you know, lots of technical and scientists, and we want to build a diverse pipeline of talent. And 3M Gives is a big part of that in terms of really investing early in STEM initiatives to get students excited about STEM and supporting them throughout their educational journey. So last year, we set a goal of trying to reach 1 million underrepresented and under-resourced students to help them advance in STEM. And, building on some of the things that Abby talked about, we looked at the National Science Foundation's definition of underrepresented, which would be, women, African Americans, Latino, Native Americans, and people with disabilities. So we were really intentional in terms of our funding and how we could make sure that those groups were given opportunities to participate in STEM activities, and then how could we support them as they kind of went through their educational journey. So we have 4 key common outcomes that we're looking for, from the investments that we're making. Number one, we want to close the STEM opportunity gap. We want to make sure that students, especially students of color and under-resourced students, have an opportunity to participate in those quality STEM programs that will lead to positive outcomes. The other piece of it is we want to increase increase the number of students participating in STEM related activities, STEM and skilled trades, I should say. And then it's the diverse pipeline of talent. As a company, we're committed to really having a diverse management team. And we know that starts with having a diverse STEM talent pipeline. So that's one of the measurements that we're looking at. And then I think ultimately we want to see economic equality by supporting the participation and the advancement of people of color in STEM fields. It's one of the fastest growing fields out there. And of course, it pays really high wages. So those are kind of the 4 outcomes that we're looking for. So how do we get there? So we focus on kind of, 3 interventions, and nothing's ever easy. Someone mentioned that it takes a lot of solutions. So we're looking at the first intervention is how can we increase interest and awareness of students in STEM? So that's kind of the connect piece for us. And we do that through a program that we have, it's called 3M Tech. I think we're actually changing that now to 3M something else. But at any rate, it's about getting classroom speakers in front of students to talk about STEM careers, to share their educational journeys with students so that students can start to see themselves in these jobs. And then 3M has always had visiting wizards. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but for more than, I think, 30, 40 years now, we've actually had scientists and other people in the company going into classrooms and doing science demonstrations for students. So that's kind of what we're doing in that, how do we generate interest and excitement in STEM? The next piece is the advancing knowledge and increasing opportunities for students to participate in activities that give them hands-on experience in STEM. So we're looking at, programs like, FIRST Robotics. How do we get more students of color to participate in FIRST Robotics? And we made some changes this year to the way we selected things that we sponsor. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. And finally, we want to increase access to degrees and certificates for students. So how do we support students who've decided that STEM is what they're interested in and now they're going on to college to major in a STEM field? So how do we provide scholarships, work with colleges and universities to support programs that really help them succeed as they go through their 4 years and beyond? So that's kind of a quick summary of what we're doing in the STEM equity space, and would love to answer questions a little bit later on. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks so much, Jackie. I'm not sure. I did get some feedback that people were like, try to take the slide down so that people focus. So you were a little corner in the slide. Moving forward, I'm just going to leave everybody in the center. That hope that is a better viewing experience. But Jackie, you guys are doing such amazing work, and very much appreciate your partnership with us at STEM Connector. And just a preview, Jackie's colleague Jayshree Seth will be our keynote speaker at our summit on September 18th. So something very exciting to look forward to. Moving along, I'm going to turn it over to Randy Bumps from Raytheon Technologies.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Ted, thank you for the invitation. And you're doing a great job moderating, given the challenges of the virtual environment and the technology. So thanks for that. Jackie's presentation is really compelling, and it reminds me of a key point from the research that Abby reviewed with us just a little bit ago, which is that in and of ourselves, individually, each one of these company efforts may not have the monumental change, may not realize the monumental change we're looking for, but when combined, right, this effort combined through the work that each of our companies is doing, I think really does move the needle. And I'm encouraged along those lines because the strategy that Jackie described is very similar to the strategy that we've been involved in building formerly at United Technologies Corporation, and now as a merged company with the Raytheon company looking forward to building for Raytheon Technologies. So what I thought I would do is share just a little bit of perspective, having led the STEM strategy development for United Technologies, a large industrial company that no one's ever heard of, but you've heard of the brands that made up that former company. So Pratt & Whitney Aircraft Engines, Collins Aerospace Systems, and then on the commercial building side, Otis Elevators and Escalators and Carrier, an HVAC company. In a diversified company like that, again, on the same timeline that Jackie described about 2.5 years ago, we decided to reimagine our STEM investment strategy and focus it really on in a few key areas. First and foremost, we recognize the need to increase diversity in STEM and to really think critically about the underrepresented and under-resourced populations in the communities where we were operating. And so when we looked at that landscape, we understood that we needed to do something to change the aspirations of students earlier in their educational journey so that they could imagine themselves working in a career in an industrial company, a sort of old school, aerospace and commercial buildings industry. And so we decided that our focus would become, demographically at least, on Black and Hispanic students, girls, and that we would focus on middle school in particular, so that we could begin to change those mindsets about what was possible from a career perspective. The next component, though, of our strategy was built on the competencies that we believe we're going to need in our workforce going some decade or more into the future. And so things like automation and artificial intelligence, in our case, the electrification of propulsion, were all really important competencies that we thought we would need in a future workforce. And so our STEM strategy was built not only on its racial equity intent or its ethnical diversity intent, but also on the competencies we thought we would need in our future workforce. And then last, we were focused on geographies. So geographies adjacent to those places where we have the largest populations of employees, the largest operations, where we could actually move students through programs that we were sponsoring on the corporate social responsibility side and provide access to them for near and long-term employment opportunities, whether they came in the form of internships or if they were ultimately hired as full-time employees. I would say the last component that we wanted to be sure we included in our strategy was to really leverage our scale as a company and the skills of our employees. So to make sure that in all of these investments in STEM programs, that we were finding a way for our employees to bring their own experience as STEM professionals into to amplify our investment in nonprofit partnerships. And so we were well along on the implementation of that strategy. I felt like I was sort of a STEM evangelist in a company of 220,000 employees. I would spend all of my time trying to persuade HR leadership and folks in the C-suite and the technical leadership in the company to come along with us on this journey. And then, as Ted inferred in the introduction, we announced the merger with the Raytheon company. And Raytheon, of course, had its own STEM strategy, not all that dissimilar from ours, frankly. And now we're on the beginning of the journey of merging those two portfolios and defining sort of that next generation STEM investment. I think it will reflect a lot of the things I've described in the Heritage UTC environment, but it will also incorporate some of the best practices from legacy Raytheon. And our new imperative, in my mind, is that we have an obligation now as we merge these portfolios to really focus on access, scale and access. So every decision we make about partnerships going forward will consider our ability to really take programs to scale as a global company with still over approximately 200,000 employees around the world. We believe that leveraging our scale as a company gives us the opportunity to really make a transformative impact in those communities. Access, again, obviously, all of the research that Abby described and everything we know as STEM professionals suggests that we've got to redouble our efforts to get diverse students into this pipeline. I would say we are also going to be critically focused on measurable impact. So the outcomes of these investments will be more important than ever. There's a certain urgency in the moment that we are living in today. The COVID world, the period of racial injustice that we're experiencing in America, and the opportunity to use those moments as the impetus really to drive strategic change in the way we implement these partnerships so that we can have measurable outcomes that we can point to for both our leadership, for our share owners, and for our employees. So a lot going on in a company that is in the middle of a huge integration, but I see this as a huge opportunity, and frankly, as we move forward, racial equity and ethnic representation in STEM programs will be the focus of our STEM investments.
That's great. Yeah, you guys have such a diverse portfolio of products that you make, from elevators to jet engines to military stuff. Yeah, a diverse group of portfolio of STEM talents, and certainly you're all over the country. And speaking of which, I just realized that, we have Jackie up in Minnesota, Randy, you're in Connecticut, and now we're going to go out to California to hear from Tamika, which is really cool, and at Boeing. So I guess this is one of the perks of our virtual meeting. So Tamika, are you? Let's see if you're.
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, there you are. Hey.
So thank you, Ted. And I must say, you come to West Coast, the best coast. So I just want to make that clear right at the start.
Oh, I miss it.
And also, like many of you may be at home at your standing desk, I am standing up right now. So if you see me kind of bob around a little bit, just know I'm switching legs over here. So Ted, again, thank you for having me today. Really excited to be a part of this panel. Jackie, Randy, definitely an honor to be online with you. And, I constantly learn from peer companies and others doing this work. So it's really great to be part of this. I also want to send a big shout out to DGR, Kathy and Michelle. We've been partners for a long time. And like Kathy said, if you do get a chance to come to the lab in Anaheim, it's definitely worth the trip. Fantastic work that they're doing. And we've been proud to be partners since almost, I think, the actual beginning, the ribbon cutting of the lab there. So really great work. I come from the Boeing company, large aerospace company, global, that you may have heard of, that doing everything from, work in space and satellites to building airplanes to even underwater programs, and also providing services. So just run the gamut across STEM education. And speaking of which, we've been invested in education for a long time, and also since the beginning, and we're now over 100 years old. So I could say that we've learned a lot over the years, and I'll talk about the work that we're doing now. So very similar to Jackie and Randy, we're constantly revising our strategy and trying to be as responsive and relevant to the needs of the community as we can be. So a few years ago, we looked at all of the work we were doing around education, particularly STEM and STEAM education, and decided to refine how we looked at the pipeline, if you will. We understood that it was very important to be comprehensive. So really looking at early learning, and by early learning, we think about kind of 0 to 5, right? Infants to 5 years old, all the way up into high school, going into college and workforce. And we kind of broke it down by a few areas. So at that early learning level, that 0 to 5 really focused on parents, caregivers, educators, to make sure those individuals understand the importance of the brain development that happens at that age. But also, just based on recent research we found in the importance of math literacy, focused on helping those individuals build math literacy skills, which some have found as an even bigger predictor of future academic success than even basic literacy. So it's those things, counting toes, going to the store when we can go to the store now, and comparing oranges and apples and those types of things, again, to get kids comfortable, but also to get parents comfortable as well with the ideas of math and science. And then moving on to elementary school levels, we really focus on getting kids excited about STEM. So providing those hands-on opportunities where they're able to experiment and play and get messy. So really working with our in-school and out-of-school partners to provide those types of opportunities. And then looking at that middle/high school level is, okay, now that you're excited about STEM, how do we connect you with career opportunities and really make the learning relevant and show you what it looks like in the real world? So we invest in programs, linked learning type programs, Project Lead the Way, those programs that really provide those career connected opportunities. And then very similar to how you mentioned, as we think about all of those areas across the board, how do we really focus on communities with the greatest needs and providing access? So that's a huge importance to us. So a little bit of what that looks like on the ground. I'll give you a couple of examples of some partnerships that we've had that'll just help paint the picture. So one of the things that we developed last year before the world kind of turned upside down, and I think a lot of it is just good timing, was a program called Future You. And really the goal of that was to provide a tool for our employees who were constantly, wanting to go out in the classroom, doing wonderful work, and wanted to make that a little bit easier for them. So we developed this online platform called Future You, where there are tons of resources, hands-on engineering design challenges that our employees could go into. They could order a kit for free, and that kit would have everything that they need to do to be able to lead those types of challenges in the classroom. There is also a tab for educators and parents. So you can go online, download resources. Everything can be done with items that you would find in your own home very cheaply, easily, online video tutorials, lesson plans for teachers, virtual field trips, so you can learn more about the space industry, what that looks like, or sustainable aviation as an example. And then we were also, I should say here, very intentional about the people we chose to feature on that site, making sure that there were diverse faces, that there were individuals that were doing everything from, tech fellow type work and, in that career, and then also folks that were doing more of the technical side that required certifications. And so making sure that we show the diversity of the types of careers that there are as well, and showing folks that there are opportunities really at every level. So, our goal with that, based on past research, was to have, about maybe 400,000 hits, and we thought we'd be successful. Well, then of course COVID comes, and there's a high demand for online resources. So I think right now, as of June, we're a little over 4.3 million students that we've impacted, and families with that Future You platform that you can go online as well right now and access. So really excited about that work. To tie that platform to what that looks like locally, a recent grant that we announced, given the issues we know around technology and access challenges, we supported the Chicago Public Schools in purchasing computing equipment for over 4,000 students in those schools, as well as over 100 teachers. So not only having that platform, but also thinking about, how do we provide access to that type of a dynamic platform? So that's a little bit what that looks like. Another example that I'll just say quickly is something we've done called STEM Signing Day, where we honor diverse students who have chosen to pursue STEM degrees, have got through the K12 system and the complexities and difficulties of taking those STEM classes, and are still excited and ready and passionate to do it. Here in LA, we've honored girls specifically who are pursuing careers in LA with DIY Girls and Girls Build LA. In Delaware, another example, they honored students, a number of students across the state there. And in addition, they used the platform that we have called Tallow, and I think Tallow is on the call today, to continue beyond that one-day event to make sure that that day is aligned with the programs that are being done in the Delaware community to help enforce STEM education for those students and make sure that they're connected to career. So those are, some of the programs, a little bit of what it looks like. I'd be happy to answer more questions as we get on with the panel. Thanks, Ted.
Awesome, Tamika. Thank you so much. I did put a link for Boeing Future U, and our partners at Discovery Education put that together for you guys, and they've been really busy over the last few months. So, and then also you did give a shout out to them, but just acknowledge Tallow, who's your partner, and I know Randy Gushel from Delaware has been very excited about the implementation of signing day in Delaware. So. I'll get everybody else on the call mentioned at some point. Thank you again. And please encourage folks as you have questions, either pop them in or send them to Alexa Gittler directly or to me directly, whatever you want. Just make sure you send them. Our next speaker is Phyllis Martin from the Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative. Phyllis?
Thanks, Ted, and thanks for having me here today, and Jackie and Randy and Tamika. I'm really excited to be listening and learning as you all are talking. Such an exciting time right now. I think many of you probably know Cradle to Careers are somewhat atypical organizations, not-for-profit organizations, and that our focus is really by design, is to say what are the systems, policies, and practices that are serving as barriers to student success. In our instance, in the Tri-County region of South Carolina, we are hyper-focused on Black children, brown children, and children living in low-income families. And we were driven to that by 5 years of data and research that we have done throughout the community. In order to get the work done, particularly as we look at STEM, there are a couple things we have to acknowledge in our community, and Cradle to Careers, I think, across the country do this. And one is that our work is to first build the right community or civic infrastructure that can sustain any of the work that goes on. So as I'm hearing all of the fascinating things that are going on, and we're so grateful for Boeing, they've been a partner of ours for years. But in order to sustain that momentum, communities have to have a civic infrastructure that is built. And by civic infrastructure, we mean really just what Michelle was talking about from the foundation, and that is the strategies, particularly when we look at STEM. Those strategies have to be designed and built by multiple constituents and stakeholders, and probably, definitely, not probably, those leading that conversation have to be those closest to the work, and those would be students and parents. And so as a Cradle to Career organization, part of the work that we do is to put groups together that includes every possible sector with student voice and with parent voice, because sitting in that group, right, sitting in those facilitated conversations are the answers and the ownership, and it allows at a very hyper local level for solutions that can be sustained to be built. And I'm going to give you an example of what that really looks like right now. When what we're saying is really, and many people say this is really a double, if not triple pandemic, but when COVID hit and the call for racial and social justice became loud and clear, as it should have, Cradle to Career just stopped in its tracks and said, we understand the need for an immediate response to what's happening, and we are not an immediate response organization. That is not what we were cut to do, but we were most certainly cut to very quickly do some research and evaluation and gather data and ask ourselves, what is it that we can do to ensure that children are going to be ready to go back to school? What in priority order are the things that we are going to need to work on? Because they will go back to school at some point. And so we pivoted our strategy almost immediately partnered with a research and evaluation engine, got surveys out to the business community, to educators, to the not-for-profit sector, and soon to be followed by parent focus groups, and immediately identified out of the gate that digital access and broadband in the Tri-County region was going to be one of the biggest issues. So if I'm just fast forwarding from March to where we are now, we are soon to release a digital broadband playbook that will serve as our region's strategic driver for how we're going to address lack of access, not only now, but in the future. So that partnership right now is built, including a 26-member steering committee that includes every possible sector that we could think of, including youth, to come to the table, working with the State Department of Education, working with the philanthropic community, faith community educators. And we are excited that we will be in this for quite some time, but there is no way we can, that we can get to moving and making impact in STEM when we know that in the state of South Carolina, it's not a huge state, but in the state of South Carolina, we know there are 180,000 households without access to broadband. We know in the Low Country, we are in the tens of thousands where that is concerned. And while hotspots are important, and we are thrilled to have those and thrilled for the business partners and what the state is doing, it's a short-term answer to a long-term problem. So Cradle to Career is looking at what are those policies and practices that we absolutely have to impact. I want to point to just two other things quickly, if I might. And I was so taken by STEM Connectors' assumptions, particularly the belief gap. And so when we talk about creating systems change, that's a driver of our work. What we really mean by that, and the hardest part of systems change, is changing mental models, which to me, I'm associating with that belief gap. It's one of the hardest things to do. So part of our work, even as we're talking about access to digital, are current beliefs and paradigms about who should have access to digital and access to broadband and why they don't. And what are the mental models that we all carry around, intentional or unintentional, that have created the current condition? Because we know that until we get to that, we are going to be having a very skewed and probably not impactful conversation. I was talking to some folks yesterday and the day before also about the work of Cradle to Career. Part of changing that mental model is really a hyper focus on our own language as an organization, as a community, and I would say as a state and as a region. And so when we really talk about STEM education or education and changing outcomes, what language are we using? Is that a primarily white dominant language that we're using? And is that language resonating when we focus on STEM? So when we're talking, this is why the student voice becomes so important. If that language isn't resonating with the students that we really want to focus on, then we have to be open and better understand what that language needs to be in our communication, in our recruiting efforts, in our own recruiting efforts as we're working with people, but across the board. And it's just a critical component of the partnership that we have with Cradle to Career, both locally and I would say nationally as well, and with our partners in the Cradle to Career partnership in the Tri-County region. So we are really excited that our focus toward economic mobility includes making progress in and with STEM. As we know, particularly in the South, if you are born into poverty, you have less than our regionally 7% chance of making it into the upper 2 quintiles of the economic strata over your life. What changes that is a certificate with labor market value, a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree. And we know that making strides in STEM is one of the most significant ways that we can get there.
Awesome. Thank you, Phyllis. that's I actually was thinking about that with regard to even the public health advisories around social distancing and COVID. At the very beginning, I was speaking to a former colleague who teaches at a historically Black college university, 1890 institution, and was saying that she felt that the advisories were just not communicating, not reaching a lot of communities of color because they were framed in this sort of like STEM educated hierarchy. So thank you very much, everybody. I don't want to. We're coming up again. We kind of went a little longer but I think it was kind of good from an expository standpoint to have folks share their perspectives, and I think that's important. So I don't want to cut into our break because I know that we are. Everybody needs a break. We realized as we were planning this and we were talking to folks that you need time to check your email, to grab a snack, to get up and walk around. So that's a very important thing. Just kind of wondering, we did sort of talk a little bit about, very quickly, Jackie, I know there's been some folks like you guys have partnered. I think this is a big piece of a lot of folks, and feel free, everybody, especially the corporate folks, to jump in. And Phyllis, if you have some insights, ways that you guys have been able to work with partners who are implementing programs in ways that advance equity. And I know that Jay Flores from Rockwell Automation asked a question along these lines. And Jay, this was what I was thinking of kind of asking Jackie, but just in terms of everybody on here, you guys fund partners, you guys fund nonprofit partners, even for-profit programs. How do you say to those groups, as folks that are responsible for, providing them funding, how can you incentivize a focus on equity? Not that the organizations don't have a focus on equity, but sometimes equity gets lost. And Jackie, could you just kind of start off? You're muted.
Sure. Yeah, I will. There are a couple of ways that we approach it. I mean, the first thing is we've had partnerships with a lot of organizations for a very long time. They're doing just great work in the STEM space, but they weren't necessarily the most inclusive. So what we've done is we've gone to them to say, if we want to continue the partnership, we need to look at ways that we can take this program that's proven as evidence-based. How do we become more intentional in getting students of color to participate? So that's one thing that we've done. And I think the question was around FIRST Robotics. I think that's a really great example of a program that has a proven track record of really, if students participate in FIRST programs, 9 times out of 10, they're going on to college and majoring in the STEM field. So we kind of know that program works. So what we did, we looked back and we said, we need to be more intentional in terms of the teams that we're sponsoring. We want to sponsor teams that have more girls, more under-resourced students, more students of color, which kind of caught some of the coaches off guard because they just kind of take the students that come and and it all works out. So what we've said now is that you have to complete an application. That application is reviewed, and we can't necessarily ask for numbers in the application, but we do ask questions like, can you tell us about your marketing strategy? How are you doing outreach? Are you able to get new and people on the team? So, and then we go back to FIRST, and then they can give us kind of the overall numbers every year. So that's one way that we become a little bit more intentional. And I'll stop there because I know others have things to add.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? I think something that we've looked at, we did an analysis of our contributions, particularly in education over the past few years. And it was about 90% of our investments were going to marginalized communities, and over half specifically directed to communities of color. So, I think we're not unique, right? I think a lot of corporations, the focus is on access. I think what we want to do more of moving forward is, have an expectation and look for those opportunities where those investments are being very intentional about reaching students of color and addressing racial inequity. There's one investment I can think of that we made very somewhat recently in Washington State with the Alliance for Education and Seattle Public Schools. And it's specifically focused, they have a department that is focused on the achievement of African-American males. So just being very specific about the goals and the objectives. Another thing that I think about, and this is a road that we are definitely still on. But, I think about my own personal experience growing up, and, ability to success. And a lot of that was my church community. There was having the, woman at my church who was also, African-American, and also was a counselor at the high school, and, told the parents there, I'm going to make sure I look out for your kids in high school. It's those personal and relational connections. And those smaller nonprofits that have the local scholarship programs, the, fraternal organizations, the sororities, again, those really localized organizations that Phyllis referred to in terms of looking at the overall system, that corporations don't naturally focus on, right? Because they don't always neatly fit into our investment criteria and what we look for in terms of how we want to make an impact and ROI and all of those things. So again, I think that's a road that we are definitely still on. But, anecdotally, but also I think data would also show that it's those organizations that early exposure and support and advocacy for students at the hyper-local level makes a really big difference in lives, in partnership with those bigger national organizations that we know off the top of our heads.
Yep. Yeah, having that scale, but also having the community buy-in, you got to kind of balance both of those things. Randy, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to pop in on this, given you're a funder in the space.
Yeah, I agree with both of the others. I mean, specificity really in the objectives and anticipated outcomes is the key, right? So being far more deliberate at the outset when you're establishing a partnership, and being very clear with the nonprofit partner about our hoped for objectives. I think the only other thing I would add is that, demonstrating a pathway to employment is often a huge incentive for the communities that nonprofits are serving. And so the more direct that line can be drawn between the experience of the students in these programs, the students served by the nonprofits, and the likelihood that there's an employment opportunity waiting for them on the back end of the partnership, is the key to helping change mindsets and behavior.
Perfect. Yeah, and with that, Phyllis, I can just let you say something quickly about that, because that aligns well with you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I think it's everything everybody said. I'd only add it, geography and alignment, mutually reinforcing activities, stacking the investments that are being made. What's the appropriate number, and how do they reinforce the activities that are already going on in a particular geography is critical, and absolutely using data as a driver, and also as a flashlight to learn.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for doing